We're on Bechukosai 708 and 709. It begins of Im Bechukosai Telechu, and if you will walk in my laws, V'yas mitzvosai tishmeru, and you will guard my commandments, v'yasisamosam, and do them. Okay, so here Hashem says the following. He says, I'm going to give you a deal. I'm giving you a deal. If you follow in the ways that I tell you, and you do my mitzvahs, I'll do something for you. What will I do? It says, V'nasati gashmechem v'itam, and I will cause rain to fall for you in an appropriate way. V'nasna aretz yavula, and the land will produce its produce. V'eitz hasadeh yitain pirav, and trees will give fruit. Right? So here we have a perfect example of a business deal. You do what I want, and I'll give you what you need, right? I'll make it possible for you to make a living in abundance. I'm going to make it easy for you, because remember, the Torah always presumes that the average Jewish person is a farmer, right? Because the Jewish culture, right, and certainly in the beginning of time, they were farmers. Everything was based on agriculture. So either literally, the Torah talks about, right, rain will fall and your crops will grow. For a farmer, that's perfect. But of course, it's also metaphorically. That is to say, no matter what you do, you need produce, or you need items to sell, or you need customers, or you need patients. Whatever it is that you need, you get it. Right? That's what he's saying. But this statement in the beginning of the parsha poses an enormous problem. It's really a very serious problem for the entire understanding of the Torah. Because the Torah, we know from our understanding of Torah, is that there is no such thing as receiving a reward for what we do in this world. That it's, I always use the example of it. If you walk in, let's say you get up in the morning, right? A man gets up in the morning, he puts on his tefillin, and he prays. When he puts his tefillin back in the bag, he finds $1 million in the bag. Why? Because you do if you do my mitzvahs, I will give you, right, you'll be successful. Well, I don't know if you know this, but that doesn't happen. Because I know, I've tried it. I even tried it more than once a day. It still doesn't work. You don't find $1 million in the bag. And the reverse. And of course, it says, if you follow my ways, then this will happen. Then, of course, it means if you don't follow my ways, then the rain won't fall appropriately, and you won't get produce in the way you need. You won't make a living. And that means, like, a guy walks into McDonald's and he eats a hamburger that's not kosher, that his stomach should fall off. He should die right there. It doesn't happen. Neither of these things happen. And it tells us explicitly in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Father, that there is no reward in this world. A person does not receive a reward for doing mitzvahs in this world. Because it's very simple, of course. If we did receive a reward in this world, then every time a man put on tefillin, he'd find $1 million. So do you think there's anybody who wouldn't put on tefillin? Everyone would. Do you think they put it on because they believe in God? Not necessarily. They put it on because they want $1 million. They can attribute that $1 million to anything they want, but they're not going to do it for the right reason. Right? And of course, the whole basis of the Torah is a person to follow the Torah is because you want to become close to God. You follow the will of God. You want to purify and improve yourself. You don't do it because you want money. Right? So that's pretty logical. It takes away your free will. You can imagine if 5 guys walk into McDonald's and they all want to buy unkosher hamburgers, and one guy's is done first and he takes a bite of it and he dies. Do you think the other 4 guys are going to eat? No. Is it because they're afraid of God? Not really. It's because they don't want to die. They could say, whatever reason it is, they can think it's poison. They can think it's God. They can think anything they want. But they've lost their free will. They no longer can choose to do a mitzvah. They're going to do the mitzvah because they know that if they don't, they'll die. And our free will is an important part of it. So this whole statement that if you do the mitzvahs and you walk in my ways, I will make all of this happen, it goes against pretty much everything we believe. It's not possible that this could be the case. Now, of course, this is written here, but if you come to shul and you read the prayers, you read the Shema, the second paragraph of the Shema says the same thing. And it says, V'hayayim Shmo, and if you will listen and do the mitzvahs I tell you, I will cause the rain to fall appropriately, and the ground will give off produce. Right? Exact same idea. Right, in the Shema every day. Now here the Shema is not really a prayer, it's a declaration of faith, like the Pledge of Allegiance or O Canada. Right? Something that where a person is making a statement that I'm that I believe in this, and right. So that means we're saying twice a day, every day, that I believe that if I follow the way of God, then the rain will fall appropriately and I'll make a living. And we also know that we don't believe that. And so it's the same idea. So we have to spend a few moments to explain really what's going on here. And to understand it correctly, to use an example I've used before, imagine we have a machine. And the machine it's an enormous machine. And it makes, let's say, sprockets, whatever that is. Okay? It makes sprockets. And in order to do so, it has 500 gears in this machine. And you press the button, it turns on, all 500 gears turn in order so that you put in the raw material in the front of the machine, and they all turn and do something to the raw material, and then a minute later out of the back comes this finished sprocket. It's a done deal now, right? So you sit there a whole day making the machine go, and the machine's got 500 of these cogs, right? These circles are going around, and they're making the thing. Now imagine now that like a Harry Potter shows up, and he gets one of these cogs, one of these wheels that are turning inside the machine, and he gives it its own intelligence, right? It's its own free will. It can think whatever it wants to think. So it suddenly comes up with the idea. It has an idea. Its idea is all 500 of us are going clockwise. I'm going to go counterclockwise. I don't want to go like the rest of the machine. It suddenly becomes aware, right? Self-aware. And so the guy presses the button, all 500 of the cogs start moving, 499 of them move clockwise, and one goes counterclockwise. Now, in this case, because there's so many of these cogs going clockwise, the machine still works. You'll still make a sprocket, but it might not necessarily be perfect, because one of the parts of the machine is going to go off, and it's not going to do its job. It's going to go the wrong direction, right? It'll probably make the sprocket, or maybe it won't make some of them, or the ones that it makes will have a flaw, but there'll be something different about it, because this one cog, right, one cog out of 500 is not going the right way. It's going the wrong way, right? And of course that makes sense. You need a machine to work correctly. If one part doesn't work correctly, it's not going to give you the product that you want. So in the same light, we look at the world that Hashem created as a world of cycles. Like, the rain comes down, it gets absorbed into the ground, and then it goes back up into the heavens. Right? It dissolves, goes back up into the heavens, and goes in a circle. You have the same idea with carbon dioxide and with oxygen. Right? The plants breathe one, give off the other. We breathe the other and give off the first one. You have every photosynthesis, all of these things are going, these are all cycles going on in the world. You have like an animal, the animal eats the grass, the animal dies, its body fertilizes the grass, right? And it just keeps going in circles. So we can imagine each one of these circles is like a cog in a machine. And when Hashem created the world, he made all of the cogs go clockwise, right? And of course grass and the moon and the sun and the stars and the clouds, they don't have a mind. They can't choose to do the will of God. God makes them and they do it, right? That's what they do. The problem is there is one entity out of all of these 500 different cycles that God made to make the world work that does have a mind. It does have the ability to go the wrong way, and that's human beings. Only human beings, not animals, not plants, right? Not vegetation. Only human beings have the ability to think, God wants me to go clockwise, I'm going to go counterclockwise. Nothing else can do that. Not that it won't do it, they can't do it. Even an animal. An animal's it has a mind, but its entire life is based on instinct. Right? A dog eats what a dog eats because it's a dog. He doesn't know why. He doesn't have personal taste. A dog does what a dog does because he's hardwired this way. He doesn't think about it. He's just what he does. That's why if a dog bites a person, you don't send him to jail and think he's going to learn how to not bite people, because he doesn't do anything with thinking. It's all instinct, even though he has a mind. Only human beings have a mind. So you can imagine now you have the whole world, everything's going clockwise, going from heaven to earth and back up, and the whole world's working perfectly. Suddenly in comes man, and man decides he's going to go the other way. So the world will still work, but it won't work perfectly. So now rain is going to come. So when everything's one with the world, so to speak, and all 500 cogs are going the right direction, all of the parts of the world are going correctly, so the rain falls, and it falls just the right amount. Right? Here it says, when he says here, it says, "V'nasati gashmichem be'itam," I will give you rain in its time. That means that I won't give, like let's say in 1 year I need to give you, let's say in this one little area, 100 gallons of water. But I won't give it to you. If I give it to you in 1 day, your plants will drown. If I give it to you too slowly, they'll die from not enough water. So I have to give it to them in their time, in the appropriate time. So here the rain comes down, but because the human being is a part of the machine and he chooses to go a different way, the rain will come down, but it won't come down necessarily appropriately. Or it may not come down sometimes. In other words, just like the machine. So the human being has the ability to go the other direction. So here's what the Torah is telling us. This is not talking about a reward. This is telling you the following. Do you want to know something? I created the world, God says, and everything in the world does what it's supposed to do. The only thing in the world, the only entity in the world that can choose to not do what it's supposed to do, that's human beings. So I'm telling you, if you do what you're supposed to do, you become one with the world, then I'll make the rain fall appropriately. I'll make the ground absorb the water. I'll make the produce flourish. I'll make the trees give fruits. Because that's what they do when everything's running correctly. But as soon as you don't do things correctly, I'm not going to punish you. It's just a reality. It's a fact. The world won't work as well. So instead of all of the world working correctly, something's going to go off, and you're going to have a flood over there, and you're going to have a drought over there, and you're going to have a volcano go off over there, right? All things that are corruptions within the world, because one group in the world, human beings, are going the wrong way. So that's really what he's telling us. So when I did this whole introduction and I explained that this is a reward, it's like a guy puts on his tefillin, he finds $1 million in the bag afterwards, right? That's not what this is at all. This isn't a reward. When God created the world, he created a world that ran perfectly. Everything ran right. There wasn't floods and droughts. There was appropriate rain everywhere. But then along comes a human being and says, I know better than God. So God says, well, I should walk down the street and turn right, and I'm going to walk down the street and turn left. Well, of course, as soon as human beings start doing what they want rather than what God wants, so then the world doesn't work correctly. And that's what it's telling us. So that's a very different way of looking at it than as a reward and punishment. Because by understanding it this way, of course, then the idea of reward and punishment still is applicable, that it happens only in the world to come. It doesn't happen here. And what this is really doing is, like, for instance, there's another concept that we find in Pirkei Avos, which is the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. The idea being is that when a person does a mitzvah, let's say you do the mitzvahs here, and you walk in the way of God, you do what it tells you. So what will God do? So let's say you decide you're going to do the mitzvah of tzedakah. So you're supposed to take 10% of your money and give it to charity. So you decide, this year I'm taking this seriously, I'm going to make sure I give at least 10% of my money to charity. And you give that, right? So you start doing this regularly, you start to have a real passion for tzedakah. You really want to do it correctly, you want to do it to the best of your ability. When God sees you do this, so what does he do for you? The reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. So he gives you more money. Why does he give you more money? So you can give more charity. But of course, you only have to give 10% of your money to charity. So if he wants you to give another $1,000 to charity, he has to give you $10,000. So, and you get to use the 9. But it's all because you did this mitzvah, tzedakah, and therefore Hashem wants you to do it more. He has to give you that, right? So it's a way. The idea being is that Hashem follows through as well. This is not a reward, really. It's like it's a way of helping. It's like when a person goes the first time to the gym to work out, right? It's very, very hard. No matter who you are and how much you did it as a child, when you go the first time and you decide, okay, I'm going to run 5 kilometers every day. Well, the first day you do it, you're not going to make it. And the first week you do it, you probably won't make it. And it's going to be painful and you're sore every night. And then finally, after maybe 3 weeks, you could go 5 kilometers very slowly. Probably maybe 2 months later, you might be able to do it at a reasonable pace. But it takes a long time. It's hard. When you first start, it's very difficult. And then as you become more used to it, you can do the same thing, the same effort, and suddenly you accomplish something. And that's the same idea here. When you do a mitzvah, so then as you keep doing the mitzvahs, it becomes easier to do. One of the reasons it becomes easier to do is because God facilitates that you have what to do it with. At first you wanted to give 10% of your money to charity, but you didn't even make enough money to pay your bills. And nevertheless you did it. So now God gives you enough money that you can pay your bills and give charity. Right? Why? Because he's making it easier. Just like when you work out the first time, it's harder. You do it for 2 weeks, it's easier. It's the same thing in the spiritual world. So that's really what it's getting to here. And then, of course, he goes into this whole discussion. I will make peace in the land, and you will lie down with none to frighten you. I will cause wild beasts to withdraw from the land. And it talks about all of the things that, of course, the ancient people, right, literally were afraid of, and we today are metaphorically afraid of. Like, I don't think we have so much worries that when we go to bed that a lion is going to come into our house and eat us. but that's the burglar could come, or that there could be a carbon monoxide get into our house, or there could be an explosion. Those things can happen. So he's telling us here that these things I will watch out for you. If you follow in my ways, I will watch out for you in this way. I'm not rewarding you. I'm just making it possible for you to continue walking in my ways. Hashem leads us in the way we want to go. So that's what it tells you. And it goes on for a number of paragraphs telling you about it. And then, of course, shortly it's going to tell you the opposite, what happens when you don't, which begins in 7:11 and 7:10. And it says, "Va'im lo tishma'uli," and if you don't listen to me, "V'lo ta'asu," it's called a mitzvah ela, and you don't do these commandments, "Bechukosai timasu," and he says, and in my decrees you find them disgusting. V'im es mishpatai tigal nashechem, and if you find that my mitzvahs repulse your soul, lebilti osos is called mitzvosai, le'afrechas has brisi, and you give up my covenant, right? Then what's going to happen? So then you see here is what's called the tochacha. The tochacha, or most people call it tochacha, is reprimands. It's what happens is that if you don't do what Hashem wants you to do, you don't follow the Torah, right? Hashem has to send you a message. What happens is like this. When we do what we're supposed to do, or we don't do what we're supposed to do, whatever it is, we all have relationships with Hashem. We all have it. The point is that very often God sends us messages. He talks to us. He doesn't talk to us like you hear voices. That's an illness, right? But when God talks to us, He does it through messages. Right? He gives you a message. Something happens that's odd, and you notice it. Right? The idea being is that when we do what we're supposed to do, right, Hashem wants to help guide us. Now, what He'll do first is He'll make the message very subtle. It won't be necessarily something that's going to catch your attention, but if you're looking for the messages from Hashem, you'll see it. Right? So let's say you don't see it. So He makes it a little bit louder. Now, a subtle message could be, you better improve your ways, and I'm going to, and you know what? There's for whatever reason that I do this specific thing, there's going to be an earthquake in China. And when you read about that earthquake in China, you should realize that happened because of you, because you're not doing what you should. Now, it doesn't mean literally because of you. There's lots of contributory reasons, and why specifically there, and a reason. But in other words, you are not part of the solution. You're part of the problem. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. So when I do something like that, I want you to notice in the newspaper, look what happened in China. Maybe that'll awaken you to what you're doing wrong. But most people, of course, don't realize that. And they say, what does my doing things here in Toronto have to do with people in China? So then Hashem says, okay, you need a little bit louder message. So something happens to people closer to you, and more closer, and more close, and more close, and more close. And then that message gets very loud. It's like Hashem's yelling at you. The point is that things will happen, right? Not necessarily as a punishment, but as a message. And that's what this starts talking about. It tells you that when you lie down, you won't have peace, and you'll have problems, and you'll lose your homes, and you'll lose your families, and people will chase you all over the world, and you'll starve. Now, these are, of course, extreme circumstances. By the way, these statements here in the Torah have happened. And in literal sense, these literally have happened. What it talks about, it says that merciful mothers will eat their children. It says that happened during the destruction of the Second Temple. That people were so starved because the Romans cut off the city that they couldn't eat, and babies died, and the mothers ate them because they had nothing else. They would die themselves. So it was a horrible thing. In a literal sense, that's exactly what happened. That those things happened. So the Torah tells you that these things can happen. What happens is the messages get so loud that you have no help but to listen. At that point, they're very, very loud. You can have messages that are positive, you can have messages that are negative, but a very important thing for Jews is to listen to messages. Listen to what Hashem's saying to us. If something happens to you that's odd, that that's not normal, even something that I don't mean good or bad, it could be inconsequential. You could be walking in the shopping mall and somebody walks over to you and says something odd, or you walk into the mall and somebody just walks by and insults you. You don't even know them. It happens, right? People do that, right? Why? You have to think to yourself, why? Why is this happening to me? What's going on? Most people will say, what did I do wrong that God should do this to me? That's not the point. Sometimes it's nothing you did wrong. Sometimes it's something you've done okay. But even if it is something wrong, it's just like when you have a child, and that child is going to put his hand in the fire. So what do? You hit his hand before he puts his hand in the fire. The child says, "Why are you punishing me? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't put my hand in the fire even. I didn't do anything, and you hit me already. Right? Now, why are you punishing me?" Right? And you're not punishing the child. You're just trying to make sure that the child doesn't hurt themselves because you care for them. Because you care for them, you're going to hit them to stop them so they shouldn't put their hand in fire. But the child doesn't understand that. That's exactly what happens to us. When God does some of these things, right? First, it happens distant. Sometimes it happens closer. But God might strike us, so to speak, might do something to us to awaken us. It's solely because there's something we're going to do, right, that he wants to make sure that we don't go down that path, and we're going to hurt ourselves. So he'll do something to stop us. And it's certainly much worse for a child to put his hand in fire than it is for his mother to slap his hand with her hand. Right? That's much worse. So, but yet the child didn't do it. So as far as the child knows, all I did is I got punished and I didn't do anything wrong. But if the child would think, and which of course is difficult for them, but we can, they would realize that my mother hit me because she was saving me, not because she wanted to hurt me, and not because I deserved to be punished. It's because she was saving me from doing something wrong. And that's exactly what the messages from God are. When God sends these messages. Now sometimes, as you'll see here, they're negative. Sometimes they're positive. Sometimes they're neither. And there you have to listen to them. The worst thing that can happen is that Hashem stops sending you messages. Because as long as he's sending you messages, there's two things to remember. One is Hashem loves you because he's going out of his way specifically for you, doing something for you specifically. So one is that we know that by having the message, Hashem loves us. And the second thing is he sees that we have an ability to fulfill our potential, to become who we should be. Right? Hashem created each one of us, and as different as our fingerprints are, so are we. We don't think the same. We don't have the same strengths or weaknesses. There are many things about each one of us that's different. We all have different potentials. As we aren't fulfilling our potential, Hashem will send us messages to fulfill our potential, to do it better, to do what we could do, become who we can become. But if the day comes where he stops sending us messages, that means he's resolved to the fact that you're not going to listen and that you're not going to fulfill your potential. And that's a sad day. That's when the father tells his kid, you're just so much trouble and so much problems and you don't listen to me, I'm just going to stop caring. Right? And the child can't handle that. They want the parent to discipline them even though they might not listen. And when the parent says, that's it, there's no more, that's like the worst thing you can do. And that's what Hashem will do eventually. If we don't listen to the message, he'll eventually stop sending messages. Because he's not cruel. He's not going to do something to you that could be painful or cause anguish if it's not going to do any good. So he just stops doing it. And then you have no messages, right? Which doesn't happen often, but it does. And that's really what we're referring to here, is that whole idea. Questions about that?
It's one of these floods Alberta way and
what's that?
The floods in Alberta, Calgary, Africa.
Right. So these types of things are, it's not, let's say I didn't do something right? It's not that they had a flood because I didn't do something right. That would be unjust, right? Because they're getting punished for something I didn't do. But Hashem is not so simple. When Hashem does something, it has many, many purposes. The fact that I did something wrong and therefore they're getting a flood, I can assure you they also did something wrong. Otherwise the flood would have been somewhere else. Or it wouldn't have been a flood. It would have been a drought. It would have been something. It's very, very specific. That's the amazing thing. They used to have this game. I never played it, but I understood it, which was called Sim City, which was a simulation on the internet of a city. And your job was to run the city. And like sometimes you'd have a natural disaster. There'd be a flood in the city. And what do? Then you're all powerful. You're like God, and you can run the city and cause things to happen in the city. And what do? The end result is that anything that happens in that city, you've got like 50 different things to take into account. Like if there's a flood, what is the effect on traffic? And what's the effect on school? And what's the effect on people? And what's the effect on someone getting to a doctor's appointment? What's the effect of someone who's sick, has a heart attack, and has to get to the hospital? All of these things are affected, and therefore it doesn't happen. So when something happens, Hashem also has hundreds and hundreds and thousands of things that are all interwoven, so that when something happens, there are many, many reasons why it happens. But one of those reasons is because you are or are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And because of that, you hear about this. right? The message comes to you. Because we have another rule which says that if you see a problem or you see something in the world that's wrong, that means Hashem wants you to see it. Right? Like lots of times you can have people who are sort of, you can say they're thick, you can say they're flighty, but they could be sitting in a room with 5 other people and they don't even know that there's anything bad happening. And the other 4 will know. This 5th one won't know. They're just oblivious to it, right? That's how some people are. That, of course, we have to sensitize ourselves to not be that way, so that we hear the messages, we know what's going on, because we have an effect. It's a very big responsibility to understand that when the Talmud tells us that the Jews, what the Jews do, so as the Jews go, so the world goes. That if the Jews do what they're supposed to do, the world will be a good place, and things will be positive, and there won't be war, and there won't be fighting. Not just for us. And it's not like we do mitzvahs just so that everything should be good for me. Of course, I'm self-serving. I care about me. I want to make a living. I want to have a nice life. So of course I have that. But people who have nothing to do with me also, I have an effect on them. If the Jew, it says that if the Romans had understood that the power of the Jews when they would offer sacrifices, they would have come to the Jewish people at the time of the Second Temple, and instead of destroying the temple and killing the Jews, they would have put a sword to the neck of the Jews and said, you go in there and you practice your sacrifices. You give your sacrifices, you do your mitzvahs, or I'll kill you. Right? Because they would understand, if they really understood, they'd realize that the blessings that come to the world because the Jews are doing what they're supposed to do. And therefore, they would force us to do it. They didn't understand that, and we also very often don't understand that, and because of that, we often do things wrong. But that's where it comes from. So that's just a bit of the introduction of the Parsha, something that the Torah seems to take very, very simply and not even stress it, but we need to do so.
Because it's like a communal effect.
Well, in this case, this one is sure. The Tochacha is talking about is national.
And the blessings too are communal.
Right.
It's not just a personal.
Correct. There are personal things, right? But there's also national ones. It's like, people say, what did the children do in 1930s to cause the Holocaust? Why would a little baby be killed? What could it have done? Nothing. I mean, a baby doesn't have to do mitzvahs. It has no consciousness of anything other than himself. And that's how he's created. It's not doing something wrong. It's just how he is. The idea is, though, that individuals, when we do things, right, we have an effect on ourselves, but it's like an inverted pyramid. So every time I do something wrong, the whole pyramid, which is all of the human beings in the world, right, first it would be me, and then it would be my family, and then it would be my acquaintances, and then my city, and then the Jewish people, and then the world. Right? It affects them. So that if I'm the point on the bottom, and everybody is the point on the bottom, and I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I tilt it. So everybody down here, a tilt has a big effect. Up here, a tilt has a little effect. Right? It doesn't go as far, but the effect can be very, very strong. And it have nothing to do really with the individual. There might be a reason that's that individual. There is a reason it's that individual, but what I did may have nothing to do with them, other than the fact that we're all connected. If we look at the end of 7:12 and 7:13, it has a funny thing. It says here we have the ending of all of these curses that happen, and it says, if despite all of the curses, you will not heed me, you're not going to listen. I'm going to send you a subtle message, and then a louder message, and then a seriously on message, and then I'm going to hurt somebody, and you still aren't listening. And you behave towards me with casualness, I will behave towards you with a fury of casualness, and I will chastise you, even I, 7 ways for your sins. And then it goes into a whole series of pretty difficult things what will happen. But what does he mean if you don't listen to me and you treat me with casualness? So this is an important idea, because you'll find that in the Torah there are 2 places where this section is. And they're different, but they're the same idea, which is, if you follow the Torah, this will happen. This comes up in Parshas Ki Savo. We'll have it in about 2 months. Right? This will happen. And if you don't follow the Torah, these things will happen, which is what it tells you here. So this is one. Another one comes up in a little while. But what's interesting in the other one, after it's finished, at the end of it, it says, and then you will return, and I will give blessing to the land. In other words, I'm going to do you're not going to listen, I'm going to have to do these things, which he's done. But back then it was before then. I'm going to have to do these things. And then he says, and then you'll listen. Finally, I'll make you listen, and then you'll have blessings. Because for whatever reason, you had to do wrong first, but then you'll see that what I did, you'll understand what it was, and you'll do correctly. At the end of this one, it doesn't say that. At the end of this one, it just changes topics. It just says you're going to have all this destruction and terrible things, and then it goes on to the next topic. So what the difference in the two, the commentaries say, is this line. Because in this case, it says that you'll deal with God with casualness, it says. While in the other case, it doesn't say that. It just says that you do wrong. But it doesn't say that you deal with casualness. What the difference is that in this case, to deal with God with casualness means that you don't put any effort. You don't have any care. You don't have any passion for what you're doing. Right? It's casual. If I want to go to shul today, I'll go to shul. If I don't feel like going to shul, I won't go to shul. It's not a priority in my life. It's not that important. Oh, Hashem wants me to say the Shema twice a day. All right, if you know what, it's not the right time. If I think of it at the right time, I'll do it. Right? Or God wants us to keep Shabbos. Well, I'll keep Shabbos, but I want to go with my family to Orlando, and Shabbos, I'm going to sit there for Shabbos and not go to Disney for a whole day, waste a whole day there. So, I'll go. These are all examples of that concept that it is a casualness, not that important, right? And therefore, he says, in the first case, they sinned. They sinned. You did wrong. You didn't listen to my messages, so I sent this to make you listen, right? But then at the end, he says, I'm going to console you. You'll come back. Here, he doesn't console us, because here it seems like we just don't really care. It's not. In the other case, it's like we had a passion for God, and then somehow someone convinced them to have a passion for idols, and we have a passion for idols. This one is, we might have a passion for idols, we might not, but we have no passion for God. Okay, we have to do it, but we don't really care that much. That lack of inspiration, the lack of feeling, right? Dealing with it casually. If you want me to do the mitzvah, if I happen to be around, I'll do it. If I happen to answer the door, I'll give it tzedakah. These types of things are showing you that it's so unimportant to you. He says, then I'm not going to console you. If you deal with me in casualness, I'll deal with you with a fury of casualness. Right? Very intense. That's why this one is actually worse than the one we'll have in 2 months, which at the end God consoles us. He says, and then you'll come back and things will be better. But this one doesn't say that. And as we know, that both of these things happened. Right, and this, of course, this idea, it continues on, this whole thing throughout the entire parsha. Well, then, if we get to page 719 and 18, we have a very strange section. This section has to do with what's called arachim. Arachim means character traits in modern Hebrew, because it comes from the weight of something. When they would, when a person would weigh with a scale, so they would have weights to weigh something. Those are signs of what something's worth. What is a person worth? They're worth what their character is. How do you act? Right? That's how. So arachim has to do with the worth, the actual worth of a person. What happens if I have somebody who's working for me as a janitor, or he moves boxes around for me? He's not a trained person in any way. He needs a job, so I hire him to move boxes around my warehouse. And as he's in the warehouse, he gets hurt, and he can't walk anymore, so he can't do his job. So he was hurt because the person who owned the warehouse was irresponsible, and it was not a safe environment for him, and the man got hurt. So now the business owner has a responsibility. So what do you pay? When you hurt a person, what do you pay? What is the payment? How about if that same person was a doctor and he no longer could operate? How about if he was a speaker and he no longer could speak? So is it all the same? Is it different? Do we judge how much they make the rest of their life? That's what you have to pay? Or do you judge what they're going to make right then? Is that what you have to pay? Or you just say that there's a certain worth to a person? So here the Torah talks about the idea that there's a certain worth to a person. And it doesn't mean that I'm judging your personality, I'm judging how special you are, unique. The Torah knows that, because everybody is unique, everybody is special. Everybody has a purpose in this world, and there's going to be somebody who misses you if you're not here. But it nevertheless tells you that every person has a basic worth. That is a worth that has nothing to do with who you are, it has to do with what you are. Right? What you are is a human being with a certain amount of strength, a certain amount of years of life, and that's what the worth is the Torah is talking about. It doesn't mean that you as a person are worth this. It means that your body is worth this. So if somebody would come by and you have a person's a piano player, and somebody would break their arm, and they couldn't play piano anymore forever, so there's a penalty involved in that. You have to be responsible for what you do. But it's not necessarily the amount of money they would have made. It has to do with the worth of an arm. Right, a general arm, regardless of the individual. And it's a very odd thing. So it goes through it. It says, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, if a man articulates a vow to Hashem regarding evaluation of living beings. So what if a guy goes and says, I will give the worth of my wife to the temple? And he makes a vow. Right? So how does he know what his wife's worth? What is that? How much is a person worth? So it says, for someone 20 years to 60 years, the valuation shall be 50 silver shekels of the sacred shekel. If she is female, the valuation shall be 30. And if from 5 to 20 years of age, the valuation of a male shall be 20. And a female, 10 shekels. And if from 1 month to 5 years of age, the valuation of a male shall be 5 silver shekels. And it goes on through all different types of people. Now, it certainly sounds very bigoted. Different types of people are worth different amounts. A woman's worth 20 shekels, a man's worth 30 shekels. Now, that's not because it's bigoted. He's talking again about the simple worth of a human body. How much is that body worth? Well, what do you do that causes money? So without a question, we're talking about physical labor. That's the common denominator. So a man whose work is that he's supposed to shovel coal for 8 hours a day, right, will shovel more coal, that the Torah is presuming, than a woman of the same age, the same background as him. Because she's not that she doesn't care, it's just she's not as physically strong. It's a fact. Men have the potential to be stronger than women. Women, their bodies are built differently. And it's got nothing to do with who the woman is. It has to do with what the body is physically worth. So that's why it gives you these very inexpensive amounts that a body is worth. Because it's not talking about the worth of a person. It's talking about the worth of the body, specifically the body. And that's the idea behind it. But then what happens, it goes from this section right into talking about the whole section of sacrifices. And the commentaries want to know, what is the relationship between the two? Between the worth of a human being and the various sacrifices on 7, 19, 20, 21 that we have there. What is the worth, the difference between them? So here it clearly it shows you that what do you do? What is a sacrifice? You take an animal, you kill it, and you burn it, right? You put it on the altar. In most cases you eat it, but you offer it as a sacrifice, right? You take the animal, you kill it, and you offer it. That means that to get the animal, there's a worth. That animal, that cow that you're offering, or that lamb that you're offering, or that bird that you're offering, cost you something. You got to buy it, right? There's a worth there. And then they go and they dedicate that animal to holiness. But that's what it's telling us with the human being. A human being has our body has a worth, like a cow's body has a worth. We have a worth. That's not who you are. But if a person even dedicates that means their physical body in the most primal physical way, if they would dedicate that to Torah, to spirituality, so then then you're raising everything up. You're taking the worth of a human being and making it greater. The average person doesn't do that, so they tell you the worth. But see, because it's a good thing for people to do, it puts it here next to the section of sacrifices. So you should understand that if you pay for a sacrifice, then the idea is that you should also pay for the worth of a person. Just like a sacrifice raises the level of people and brings them closer to God, so too you should do that. And that's the point here. Right, it pretty much closes at the end of the parsha with the same idea, going through this. The constant story here is basically we start with what happens if you do the will of God. Then it talks about what happens if you don't do the will of God. Then it talks about the worth of human beings. Then it talks about some sacrifices, and then it concludes with some various laws of things that happen where people might do something right or might do something wrong, and how the Torah feels that they should be dealt with. Right? A person who steals, a person who murders. What do we do to such a person? Right? You have to create a legal system. The Torah is new. We just got it, and it has a legal system in it. But let's take a few minutes to talk about another area, and that area pertains really to the holiday season rather than the Parsha. And right today is Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni means it's the second Passover. What's it from? Is that originally the Torah tells you that in order to celebrate the Passover Seder with the actual sacrifice in the days of the temple correctly, every person has to be what's called tahor. Tahor means that if you are exposed to a number of things, including a dead body, what's happened is that your body has acquired from being in contact with this certain deficit, a spiritual deficit. It's an inability to do certain things spiritually. And so therefore you have to go through a process to get rid of it. Today we're all like that, all of us. We don't have a temple to cleanse us. One of the most severe form of the spiritual effect that a person can have, the most negative severe one, comes from being in contact with the dead. So that means you don't have to touch a dead person. You just have to be in a room with a dead person. You have to walk into a cemetery, for instance, is sufficient. Or you touch somebody who touched a dead body. Or you touch somebody who walked into a cemetery. The fact is, every single one of us have done something like that. And if you didn't, your mother did. And when she gave birth to you, you touched her. And now you are in the same situation as her. So the point being is that when a person goes through this and they become tameh, so you have to go through a process to get rid of that, and you have to get rid of that in order to have the sacrifice for Passover. So how it's done is that they would use the paraduma. The paraduma is a red cow, and they would slaughter it like a sacrifice. They would burn it, and they would get a dust from it, right? Like an ash. And they would sprinkle the ashes onto a person. So you had to get a special Kohen who would do this ritual, who would then take the ashes and sprinkle them on people. But there's a number of interesting rules. One of the rules is the Kohen himself, he has to be already tahor. He has to be spiritually awakened, which nobody else is at this time, but he has to be. And if he is, then he can pour the ashes on the other people, and then they'll become the same way. They'll be spiritually awakened. Now, what the interesting rule is that while he has to be spiritually awakened when he does it, so he goes through a whole process on his own, what then happens, though, is that as soon as he finishes, he becomes the opposite. He becomes the way the people were, which was unable to go into the temple and to use these things because they had this spiritual deficit. He becomes that way. So if he becomes that way, everybody else in the world that he puts the stuff, the ashes on, can eat from the sacrifice for Passover, but he can't. He can't. And what did he do wrong? He just helped other people so they could. He didn't do anything wrong. Right? But that's a physical reality of God's world. So if that's the case, then how does he celebrate Passover? Because Passover is an enormously important holiday. The Passover sacrifice was an enormously important sacrifice. Everybody has to do it, but he can't do it. And there are others who can't do it for numerous reasons. They couldn't get the ashes put on. They didn't do it in time. Something happened last minute. Right here it is 2 minutes before it's time to eat the Passover sacrifice, and somebody dies, and you have to deal with it. Right? So there were lots of reasons it could happen that you weren't able to participate. So when this happened, the Jewish people went to God and they said, look, you're building in a failure. There's no way we can all do this. So God said, okay, what I'll do is I'll make the Pesach Sheni. I'll make a second Passover. It'll be 1 day. And for any person who didn't keep Passover Seders correctly, because they as we just described about what happens to a person, if there's anyone that's like that didn't keep the Seders correctly, I'm going to give them a special holiday called Passover number 2. It's 1 month after Passover, and then on that day the people are required to then celebrate Passover. So they're in the days of the temple, people actually celebrated Passover today. The ones who couldn't do it then. Now they didn't keep all the laws of Passover. They had to keep it then, even if they didn't do the Seder, but they do the Seder now. In fact, many people have a custom today, sometimes during the day, when you have a meal, to eat a piece of matzah, symbolic of this idea. And that happens today. That's called Pesach Sheni. It's somewhat of a holiday. So some of the synagogues will omit certain sad prayers, some won't, because it's a holiday because it's Pesach Sheni, it's in the Torah, and all holidays we don't say certain memorial prayers for the dead. Nevertheless, there's on this holiday it's questionable if it's that strong a holiday or not. So those who say that it is will not say that for those prayers, and those who say it's not will say the prayers. But it's neither here nor there. The important thing is that it happened, and this was a reality. Now, what happens right away after Pesach Sheni, being 30 days after Passover, after it starts, is Lag BaOmer, which is 33 days, right? 33 days after Passover. And Lag BaOmer we're celebrating it on Lag BaOmer this year on Sunday. Then please God, all of the rain that we've been getting will stop in time, because it's always a great time. This picnic is one of the great. We do picnics all summer in our shul, but the one on Lag BaOmer, when the weather's nice, it's the best, because we go out to this park, and there's a map on our flyer that's not far at all, but we're the only ones there. And we make a bonfire, and we have a barbecue, and you can come and buy hamburgers and hot dogs, and everyone can just sit around and have a nice time. And it's a wonderful afternoon without an agenda. And we have children's programs. We bring children's workers with us, and sometimes we even have a band will come and play. So all kinds of things can happen that make it a fun time. But Lag BaOmer is an odd holiday as well, because Lag BaOmer is in the middle of Sefira. Sefira is a time that according to the Torah, is a time that we count from Passover to Shavuos, because every day we are getting closer to the giving of the Torah. Every day we have to work on ourselves to be better people. From when we started out as slaves, now we're going to be the most powerful nation. But also, Sefira later on, not in the Torah, but later on, has a relationship to a lot of sad things. One is the death of 24,000 Rabbi Akiva students, all within the period from Passover till Lag BaOmer. Another one is the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the founder or the writer of the Zohar, really the one who took mysticism or Kabbalah and made it much more accessible, although not fully accessible, but more accessible. And he dies years later, years after Rabbi Akiva's students died. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva's, but from a different generation. He was later. And he dies in that day. And also many of the pogroms during the era of the Crusades happened in this time, during this time of year. Usually there was a common understanding with a lot of Catholics that because of the whole relationship between Passover and Easter, right, because they had his final supper. That was when he was at the Passover Seder. You can see all of this going on. So when they used to strike out against the Jews, because the Jews would celebrate the holiday their way, right? While the non-Jews were saying, we're celebrating Easter because Jesus was killed and now he has to come back, and he comes back on that day. But still, they say that the Jews caused all the trouble. So there were always bad things that happened to Jews throughout the Christian world at this time. And so therefore we mourn from the day after Passover until now. That's why the men don't shave, we don't get haircuts, we don't play live music, we don't get married, all during this period. And that ends on Lag BaOmer, because we're told on Lag BaOmer the Rabbi Akiva students stopped dying. And we're told that on Lag BaOmer, just like Shimon Bar Yochai later on died, it was also the day that he came forth with the Zohar, the book of mysticism, for the world to have. So it brightened the entire world. And because of this, we see that Lag BaOmer was a time of mourning, and then Sefira is a time of mourning. Lag BaOmer ends it. It stops the mourning. So you'll see that come Lag BaOmer, everyone will get a haircut, they'll shave, and things will be back to the way they were. But we see a couple interesting things. First thing is, we celebrate the Rabbi Akiva students stopped dying on Lag BaOmer, but it's not much of a celebration, because all it means is that there were none left. They all died. So they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer because they were all dead. So I'm not sure how much of a celebration that is, that we should celebrate that Rabbi Akiva students stopped dying on Lag BaOmer, because there were no more students. Right? Not because there's more students and they didn't die. They all died. So how is that a celebration? So the point is that we know Rabbi Akiva, I spoke about it in one of my drushes, was an extraordinary figure in that he lived on a plane that was above all of us. And we see it in a number of ways in the Talmud. Like there's a famous story in the Talmud where he's standing on Mount Scopus, where Hebrew University is today, and he was some of the other rabbis, and they're looking at the Temple Mount, which you can do from there. You can see it because you're high up in the air, and they would all start crying, and he laughed. And they said, "Why are you laughing, Akiva? There's a destroyed temple right there. The Romans destroyed it." And they saw a fox running across the temple. And they said, "It's horrible." And they started to cry. And they said, "Why are you laughing?" And he says, "Why are you crying?" And they said, "Because look at this. You got a fox running across the Temple Mount, right? Where not even the human beings can go. They're only special human beings. And now a fox can run across it because of our sins. And the Romans destroyed it." And he says, "That's exactly why I'm laughing." Because he knew that there was a prophecy. One prophecy that is a later prophecy says that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I'm going to destroy the temple. And an earlier prophecy says that after the temple will be destroyed, the time will come where old people will sit in parks and young children will play in the streets. Right? In other words, that it'll come back. So Rabbi Akiva says, well, if the second prophecy is true, look, the temple is destroyed, then the first one must be true also, that the people will come back. So that's why I'm happy. Right? So that idea is that Rabbi Akiva lived always on a higher plane. He didn't look at things like you and I do. He looked at it on a much more sort of lofty way. And it's the same idea when we talk about this. When Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying, it wasn't because there were some that were left behind that didn't die. They were all gone. So why do we celebrate it? And it's like, God's going to kill everybody, and then when everyone's dead, then we'll celebrate. That's no reason to celebrate. Right? That's not called stopping. It's called nobody left. It's because immediately after this happened, Rabbi Akiva went down to the southern part of Israel, and he taught a new school. And he refilled the world with thousands of students. And this, the commentaries on the Talmud tell us, is really the point. That Rabbi Akiva's students died, and that's nothing to celebrate. And they stopped dying because there were none left to die. But then along comes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and comes all of these things I told you about. And Rabbi Akiva realizes that the world, everything was destroyed because of our actions, but that things are going to change. Right? And so he went to study and to teach. He didn't give up. Here's his old man. Everybody in his yeshiva died. So he's going to start a new yeshiva, and he does. And that's a cause for celebration. And that's what it tells us. The fact that he went and he gave of himself, and he said, I'm not going to give up. I'm an old man now. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go and I'm going to do it again. I'm starting all over from the beginning. I will make more students, and he did. And that courage that he had to do that is a lesson for us on how to act. In fact, I'll tell you that my family had a lot of involvement with the German Jews in New York, and we used to go sometimes up to in the summer. They have, like we have here, cottages, so they call them bungalows, but it's the same idea. And most of the Jews go in the southern part of the Catskills that's close to New York City, southeast, so it's closer to New York. But places like Woodburn and Woodbridge, Kamisha Lake, these are names that you hear from like the Hasidim and other observant Jews. It's where the Grossinger's Hotel was, and all the famous Catskill hotels. They were all there. They're all gone now. But now people have homes there, and all the Jewish summer camps are there. But the German Jews are not in the same area. They, for whatever reason, decided to go north of the Catskills, so it's another 45 minutes further from New York City, in a city called Tannersville. And in Tannersville, you had all the German Jews there, and the rabbis. Rabbi Breuer, who was one of the great rabbis of the last 100 years. And Rabbi Breuer created it was called the Breuer's community, or the German Jewish community of Washington Heights. You can imagine that they were decimated during the war. Right? They came from Frankfurt. It's a place where the Nazis found very quickly. Right? They were there. So a lot of them left before the war, and they started working in this community. But when Rabbi Breuer came over after the war, right, he was already in his late 60s after the war, and he had lost everything. His entire what they call then the Hirsch community, started by Samson Raphael Hirsch, of which Rabbi Breuer was a great grandson. Right, he from that same family, and he became the rabbi. They were an amazing community. It was an enormous community, very strong. It was very similar to us in some ways. I mean, they were much bigger and much stronger, but they provided all types of things for the members. They had an old age home, and they had nurseries, and they had schools, everything under this synagogue, and they did everything. And Hirsch came to Germany. I mean, Hirsch came to Frankfurt. There were 9 Orthodox families. He became the 10th Orthodox family and opened a shul, which was illegal. The Reform movement had made it illegal to practice Orthodoxy in Frankfurt, and he came and opened up the first Orthodox synagogue there. And in any case, that's a sideline. But to get back to the point, so you have Rabbi Breuer, right, who was, as I said, in his late 60s when he came to America, after having this amazing community in Germany, which was totally destroyed, and now he comes to America in his late 60s with nothing. Most people would say, you know what, I'm an old man already. I'll come, I'll be a member of the synagogue, I'll go every day. You want me to speak once in a while, I'll speak once in a while. But you know what, I was a rabbi for 30 years already back in Germany. It's finished. So let the young people take over. But he didn't. When he came to America, he said, no, we have to do something. We've got to build. We have to make a community. We have to have a place for our people. And he did it. And he made soup kitchens and old age homes, and he made children's schools and schools for girls and for women, and all types of things, all types of charitable organizations, and a synagogue right in the middle of it, which is referred to now as Breuer Synagogue. And he started it, and he developed it, and he worked at it, and he did it from the time he was in his late 60s till he was about 90 years old when he did die, and Rabbi Schwab took over. But he has that same trait that Rabbi Akiva had. Rabbi Akiva was an old man. Remember, Rabbi Akiva didn't become religious until he was 40. So for him to have been the head of a yeshiva, it took quite a while. We know that he spent at least 20 years learning in yeshiva because of his wife, who let him do it at least that long. So we're talking about a man who's probably in his 70s when all of his students died, maybe his 80s when all of his students died. At that point, you'd say, like, my life is destroyed. Every student that I have, they died. Why did they die? Because they fought with each other. They didn't treat each other correctly. Whose fault is that? It's my fault. I'm the teacher. I should have taught him. Like, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to go to Florida and live my last few years. So Rabbi Akiva doesn't do that. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I have to teach Torah. We have to bring the Torah back to life. And Lag BaOmer, he said, all my students are dead. That's it. It's time to turn the page. Let's go and open up a new place and bring in new students. And some of the greatest students of Jewish history became those new students, like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, great names of people, because he would not give up. That's why Lag BaOmer is a happy day, because no matter what happened, right, and no matter what reason it was that they stopped dying on that day, they didn't give up. They continued to strive. Rabbi Akiva continued to work and to do things, because he felt that it was necessary for the sake of Torah and for Judaism to rebuild. And he did, even though he was an old man. And because he did that, it becomes a celebration. And so that's why Lag BaOmer is considered a holiday.